1, 2, 3, 4.
My Dress Up Darling is one of the biggest examples of why anime and manga have a huge problem. Now, I'm not talking about the problem of having an imaginary underage girl drawn in cartoon form to do and wear lewd things. It's a deeper problem than that. My Dress Up Darling manga has been ongoing for about 5 years now, starting its serialization in 2018. Compared to mangas like One Piece or Bleach, it's still baby's work, but for a romance manga, I think that it is quite long. I started reading the manga in 2021. It was technically one of my first manga I've ever read, and I was a bit skeptical to start reading it at first. From what people post about it on Instagram, I really didn't find the art to be amazing from a glance. Back then, I was so adamant on the art of the manga. It became one of my biggest factors on whether I should read the manga or not. But since I've heard very good things about it, I decided to not get on my ass too much and just read it. The first chapter already had me hooked on the manga. The introduction to Gojo and Marin's character was already enough for me to waste my days just reading the manga. Also later on, I came to appreciate and love the art as well, even though I was a bit skeptical at first. During the first 50 chapters I read, I was like a train. I kept going until the end of the tracks or until it stopped. Using the greatest pirating manga websites known to man, it's easier to catch up to the latest chapters. During that time, I was fine waiting for a month to wait for a new chapter as I loved the manga so much. Every interaction, every time Marin appears on the panels, I knew that I was going to have a fun time. Until recently. I would say around 60 chapters and so on, it became one of the most boring things that I've ever read. They just keep going on and on about cosplays and things about cosplays that I eventually lost interest in the manga. From waiting every month to a new chapter with excitement, now to waiting every month and dread while reading the chapter. And this is not only a problem with My Dress Up Darling manga, this is a problem with a lot of mangas that are in serializations right now. Of course, it is kind of impossible to just develop the story straight in 2 chapters, but in this case, it's different. How many times have you thought to yourself, wow, that was useless? Why did I waste my time on that? And believe it or not, you probably thought about it quite a lot. Especially when you're me, just a college student who loves his home too much, trying anything and everything not to fall into boredom. My Dress Up Darling has quite a lot of arcs and developments in the 87 chapter that it has. Now I'm still using MDD, My Dress Up Darling, as an example as it encapsulates and sort of represents the manga that I read and love, and what's wrong with a lot of manga today. After 50 chapters, we enter a school festival arc like any other romance manga and anime in existence. It has one. Usually it has these 3 things: a hangout after the school festival ends, doing the school festival things like haunted house or maid cafe, and a confession scene. Well, in MDD, the school festival doesn't focus on any of that. Instead, focuses on Marin participating in a beauty pageant and has to dress up as a male. Not that it is unique or original, but at least it stays true to the cosplay theme of the manga. Marin participates in the beauty pageant having to dress up and look like a male. Of course, she asks Gojo to help her achieve that and to win it. But Gojo was also asked by his classmates to help them arrange other stuff for the school festival, and Gojo was very hesitant on helping Marin as Gojo doesn't want to be seen as the person who left the class behind to help Marin instead. This brings back to Gojo being a loner and doesn't want to be a burden towards his classmates, so he feels that he let down Marin because he couldn't help her as he needs to help his classmates. His mind starts running around about how he can finish helping his classmates quick enough so he can get straight to making the costume in time for the beauty pageant. As his anxiety arose, it all went away as his classmates already decided that Gojo needs to work on the costume fully and leave the other classwork arranging stuff to his classmates. This shows a lot of development in Gojo and in the story as well. We can see now that Gojo can rely on his friends and classmates without taking the burden on himself. That lasted about 10 to 12 pages in a single chapter. After that, we see the usual process of making the costume and the breakdowns of it. There's also a part where Gojo has a classmate that was in the same situation as him, where this classmate of his liked something that was considered embarrassing to other people and hides it to himself. We can see the development where Gojo said to his classmate that it was fine to like these things and to be proud of it, and that lasted about 5 to 7 pages. After that, it's the part where Gojo puts the costume on for Marin, and of course Marin looks fantastic and like an ikemen, and she won the beauty pageant agent really showing how cool she looks when she's cosplaying. While it's great that we get development in Gojo's part and the story as a whole, it didn't last too long from what I felt. Also, at the end of that arc, it didn't develop in a way that I wanted to. As I said before, it's great that Gojo has developed well in that arc, but why was I reading so much about how the costume is made? This is the first arc that I've put a pass in regards to that. The later arcs and chapters, there were no development at all for Marin, Gojo and their relationship. Instead, they waste precious panels and chapters on things like cosplay breakdowns, explaining the lore of a fictional character in a manga in MDD and it's a whole paradox. Why does it need to emphasize so much on these things? Why is there so much explaining and reading for things that weren't the reason people read the manga for? It happens way too often now in the MDD manga. We see Marin and Gojo doing their daily things, then a whole ass chapter of breaking down on how using spit is more effective than glue when putting these two fake ass cheeks together. While I do agree on those things to slow down the pace of the manga, the biggest problem is, does it matter? Will I care? The arc I explained before, it does have its great moments and all, but those moments last so short and just put more emphasis on the cosplays and other things that are not the characters. The MDD manga, I see it as a story of two people with two different personalities come together to love each other through the world of cosplay. And not in a world of cosplay, two people love each other. So far, it's going to be a long ass time before Gojo and Marin are going to be together, and it really pisses me off so much when manga and anime drag on something too long without doing anything interesting. It needs to be balanced between development and dragging on. I've always been a big fan of the Fate series. As you know from the last 10 videos I've uploaded, it is all Fate or FGO related as I love the series. The first series I watched was the original Fate Stay Night that aired in 2006. I thought it was alright, while of course the quality wasn't the greatest, it did make me delve into the Fate rabbit hole. While it is impossible to understand the Fate series as a whole, but to me, understanding it is the least of my worries. The reason why I love Fate has nothing to do with the world they live in, or the interesting concept of the Holy Grail War. It's purely because of the people in it, the characters. Fate always goes deep into the philosophical minds of its characters, and it always makes it clear what their goals, motivations, and reasons are. Why is it that Kiritsugu does what he does? Why does he sacrifice the small in order to save the masses? Or why is it that in Fate Stay Night, Heaven's Feel, Shiro decided that he wants to live on instead of sacrificing himself to save everyone? We see their journeys and we see how the story and the world influenced their actions and decisions. Let's move on from Fate and onto Red Dead Redemption 2. Red Dead Redemption 2 is arguably one of the best single-player story games ever made. I loved it as well, and a big part of the reason why I loved it is because of the characters. Arthur Morgan, my favorite video game character of all time. We see how the story and world affected him, where eventually he has to make decisions that will forever change his life and his character. Arthur's story to redemption is one of the most beautiful stories I've ever seen in anything ever. From a ruthless killer to a man trying to make sure everyone is safe. Fate and Red Dead Redemption has both really interesting worlds and themes, but what it really makes the whole thing interesting is the characters. And this is where I get to my main point. A lot of anime and manga focal points are on the world they're living in. This ties back to my point before, where manga and anime really likes to emphasize on things that are not the characters. An uninteresting world, an unoriginal theme, but with fantastic and beautiful written characters, or an anime with a fantastic plot, interesting world, original theme, but with bland characters. Well, my answer is the first one. An anime with subpar plot, uninteresting world, and unoriginal theme, but with fantastic and beautiful written characters. And I think that's the case with Fate and RDR2, Red Dead Redemption 2. Fate has an interesting world, but it is very hard to understand. Sometimes the plot does not live up to the potential, but the characters are what make the story alive and what keeps me interested. Red Dead Redemption 2, a world that we have seen many times, the Wild West. The plot is a bit too long and dragged out, but the characters are the reason as to why millions love the game. The theme we see many times, redemption, is explored and shown in the most beautiful way possible because of the characters. That's what a lot of anime and manga has a big problem on. They spend too much on world building and coming up with an original theme that the characters never get the spotlight and most of the time falls flat, resulting in a piece that will never live up to its potential. Most of the time, when I read a manga or watch an anime, the world, the theme, and the plot is not what I mostly take interest in. That's something that even the most popular genres fail to do a lot of the time. A big example of this is the isekai genre. Why is it that most of the isekai genre is very uninteresting? It's because they only focus and care about the world and the theme, and most of the time, it's the same thing. They also have the most bland characters that makes it dreadful to watch or read. Same with a lot of shonen and romance. Shonen anime and mangas always have problems in standing out from the rest because they always follow the same tropes and formula. And for some reason, they can just never put 80% of the effort into making the characters interesting. Making a character go through a training arc or big fight with no real meaning behind it and getting stronger does not make a character interesting. Making a character with cool powers does not make it interesting as well. What makes a character interesting is their personality, their character development, their journey, and how they face their problems. Red Dead Redemption 2 is a story about Arthur Morgan, and a lot of the great mangas and anime are like that. Berserk is a story about Guts, Vinland Saga is a story about Thorfinn, Vagabond is a story about Miyamoto Musashi, Bocchi the Rock is a story about Bocchi. You see the recurring theme here? Great characters make great stories. Not the world, not the plot, not the theme. Well, at least in my opinion. If you have great characters, even the simplest theme and world will be great as well. As the saying goes, plot is no more than footprints left in the snow after your characters have run by on their way to incredible destinations. Now this video isn't a reason to talk about Gintama, but maybe it is. Gintama for me is the best piece of media I've ever watched. Gintama has everything I ever wanted in a series, show, or movie. For me, it's such a complete series. It's everything done right in anime and manga according to my opinion. Hideaki Sorachi has produced one of the most beautiful series ever. The only anime that changed my life in a way. As I said before, it's a story about Gintoki, Kagura, Shinpachi, and every character in it. Although it seems like Gintoki doesn't go through any development throughout the series, it's more that he is the reason why every character in Gintama has gone through a character development. Here is the most perfect analysis of his character by the Reddit user Psychological Row 6110. Most protagonists in anime and manga are usually dynamic characters who undergo significant change throughout the story. Great examples are Edward, Elric, and Guts. You rarely see any static main characters in anime who push the narrative and be interesting and entertaining as Gintoki Sakata from Gintama. Gintoki Sakata is a completely static main character who doesn't undergo any significant change because he has already undergone the development that the shonen protagonists tend to go through in adolescent times. He is already someone who has gone through 95% of the development already at the beginning of Gintama. We as the audience don't know anything about his backstory in the earlier episodes of Gintama. We may perceive him as just a fourth wall breaking lazy goofball who has bad habits in standalone episodes. As Gintama progresses through its series arcs, it slowly adds complexity to Gintoki's character and make him all the more believable. In series arcs, it gives a set of pieces of Gintoki's backstory and delves into Gintoki's psychology and dark side of him really well. In series arcs, Gintoki is a seriously well-realized adult who influences the characters around him. It really helps the audience to get easily invested in his backstory. It culminates in the Shogun assassination arc, which completely changes the Gintama from episodic comedy series into a plot-driven show. It also reveals the ultimate truth about Gintoki's backstory, his deal with his childhood friend or rival, and his master. Gintoki is a war veteran who has suffered PTSD due to killing his master and losing all bonds he has created throughout his adolescence. After that, he had a nihilistic view of the world where he doesn't have any goal or purpose in life. He formed Yorozuya with no goals in mind. After meeting Kagura and Shinpachi, he has formed bonds, friends, and companionships with great characters again, which he had lost during his war. By creating bonds, he regained his sense of himself and his purpose in life. After the Shogun assassination arc, he resolves his past ghosts one by one. He also learns the ultimate truth about his master is just the kind personality of the main antagonist, which had deeply impacted him. He has the remaining 5% of development after the Shogun assassination arc. That is why Gintoki is such a great static protagonist who has an interesting personality and great character depth. Gintoki's personality and his interactions with other characters are one of the best things about Gintama. That analysis is one of the reasons why I love Gintama so much. It perfectly solves all the problems that I have with a lot of manga and anime where the characters are uninteresting and they focus too much on the world. Gintama breaks a lot of the shonen tropes and formulas, and it manages to deliver one of the most beautiful pieces of media ever created. It's a story about its characters and their relationships and their interactions with another. It's a story about the characters and not about a samurai on his way to defeat the ultimate evil. It's the story of Gintoki and his friends, and if you haven't seen it, I suggest you watch it. When you finish it, I know you'll want more of it, because that's how I felt also.